I was on the front line in the war on drugs. I was infiltrating drug dealing gangs, gathering evidence against organised crime. And I did that for a long time. I worked undercover over the space of 13 years. I put a lot of people in prison. I almost got killed on multiple occasions, for which I now have PTSD. And I also caused harm to a lot of vulnerable people. I was manipulating vulnerable people in order to get them to introduce me to organised crime figures. And I'm talking about people who were using heroin, crack cocaine problematically, who needed help. They didn't need me manipulating them and emotionally scarring them. After many years, I realised the harm not only I was causing to individuals, but also the harm I was causing to society. I realised that I had to leave the police and I had to try and do something about it, something positive.
Hi everyone, welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. Today with me I have Neil Woods. He is a former undercover police officer and best-selling author of Good Cop, Bad War and Drug Wars. And he's become a leading figure in the international drug law reform movement and is a board member of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership in the USA. Welcome and thank you for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Susan.
And I'm interested in the first thing that comes to my mind. You're probably our first unique guest in the sense that you were a former police officer in the UK. What brings you to this movement and the voice that you have? What brings you to this work?
Well, I don't talk normally specifically on psychedelics, so much as I love Breaking Convention, it is the conference full of the nicest people. It's not my normal topic. Mm-hmm. I normally speak on drug policy conferences or try and further the conversation in lots of hard to reach spaces. But how did I come to this movement? Well, I suppose I was on the front line in the war on drugs. I was infiltrating drug dealing gangs, gathering evidence against organised crime. And I did that for a long time. I worked undercover over the space of 13 years. I put a lot of people in prison. I almost got killed on multiple occasions, for which I now have PTSD. And I also caused harm to a lot of vulnerable people because I was manipulating vulnerable people in order to get them to introduce me to organised crime figures. And I'm talking about people who were using heroin, crack cocaine problematically, who needed help. They didn't need me manipulating them and emotionally scarring them. So after many years, I realised the harm not only I was causing to individuals, but also the harm I was causing to society, because the response of organised crime to drugs policing is to perpetually become more effective, more ruthless, more violent. And that is the war on drugs, because it's not really a war, it's an arms race. It's a perpetually developing arms race where organised crime become more effective. And that is what we are doing by trying to police prohibition. So eventually, I suppose I was quite slow on the uptake, really, in realising the harm that was being caused. But I realised that I had to leave the police and I had to try and do something about it, something positive. And so I became a full-time writer, activist, public speaker. And that's what's brought me to Breaking Convention. I've spoken here before. It's a wonderful conference to be at. It's much more relaxing than most conferences I attend or speak at. But I have a particular message here. You know, there's an important thing to say here, and that's what featured in the panel that I took part in yesterday.
Okay, tell us a little bit about this panel and your stance on this, because before we started recording, you said it's not about just the psychedelics, it's about the entire drug policy.
Yeah, exactly. So the panel that we did, and you can go onto the Breaking Convention YouTube channel, and all of these talks are available in half-hour chunks afterwards, because the filmmaker who belongs to the conference, Cara Levan, she does a brilliant job. It's really good work in editing it all. So the conference was Cara who hosted it. We had Zoe Garbett, the Green Party mayoral candidate for London. We had Steve Rolls from Transform Drug Policy Foundation, who is the author of a book that arguably changed my life when I read it as a police officer, which is Blueprint for Regulation. We also had Shobha Ram, who is a brilliant harm reductionist from Bristol. And I suppose the collective message that we had is that there is an ecosystem in drug policy. Everything is connected. And a message that I'm always keen to say is that there is great risk in exceptionalism. Now, we've seen it for years within the cannabis movement that people will say, I want to legalize my drug, but not those other drugs because they're too dangerous, or they're too weird.
Yeah.
And there is a strong exceptionalism aspect to the psychedelic community, much as many people might want to deny it, there is. And that's not helpful, because if we are championing cognitive liberty, it has to be everybody's cognitive liberty. Mm-hmm. If we are championing personal autonomy, it has to be for everybody. And what we decide to do with our own mind and body has to be up to us, right? It has to be. And it is the responsibility of state to make that as safe as possible. It's a simple thing, but many in this community, unfortunately, have not grasped how important that is yet. Because we can't champion psychedelics because we feel they are transformative for us and community when people are dying or being murdered for access to heroin or cocaine.
Right.
We have to have a responsibility for everybody, and that's the whole of drug policy. And I suppose as an activist, what I've learned to understand, especially studying the history of social justice movements, is that social justice movements become strong when we have unity, when we see ourselves as part of one movement, and we see ourselves as equal value to our comrades in another part of that movement. And so I suppose that's the simple message, really, that we tried to do from that talk yesterday.
Yeah.
Is we have a responsibility to people dying. There are 100,000 people dying from drug policy violence in Mexico every year, and it's increasing. That's not from drug deaths and overdoses. That's people who are being murdered because of the war on drugs. And we have a responsibility to that. Now, I've spoken to many beautiful people in this psychedelic movement, and some will say, and they believe it, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but people will say, well, if just more people took psychedelics, there would be less violence, because people would see the interconnectivity of everything. This would create a sort of almost viral response, a ripple in the pond where there would eventually be less violence. It's a beautiful thought. I'm not disagreeing. What I'm saying is we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that. Organised crime is growing in violence. The climate crisis is being fueled by drug prohibition, because organised crime are perpetually becoming more powerful. They are corrupting not just individual people now, but entire nations. We have entire narco states: Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, Honduras. We're watching the destruction of the democracy of Ecuador on an almost weekly basis by drugs organised crime. And this is caused by policy. So we haven't got time for the hope that psychedelics can cure this in isolation. We need to be one movement. And that means supporting people like my organisation, the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, or anyone's child who represents families who have been affected by drug policy, or Transform Drug Policy Foundation, or all of these people in this ecosystem who are working incredibly hard in political advocacy, in trying to get speaking events in hard to reach places, not comfortable, easy places like this, in difficult places. And I just want to try and activate the intellect here, and the passion, to make people feel like they realize that they belong to something much bigger than just a movement about one subset of drugs.
This is such a powerful message. Thank you so much for sharing. And also, if you look at Stan Grof's approach in the psychedelic world, he says these are non-specific amplifiers.
Yeah.
So I think, would you say that we need to move away from psychedelics can cure everything and everyone? Because not necessarily. I mean, I remember apprenticing with an indigenous woman when I was early days. And this struck me so deeply. She said, ayahuasca became a medicine when the Westerners discovered it. And I said, what were you using it before? And she said, I don't know, we were scared to talk about it even. It was used for black magic, to harm one another. You know, it wasn't a medicine at all growing up. So this brings us back to, are we in this delusion of psychedelics? You know, like, you know, sometimes you see these activists with their signposts saying all politicians should drink ayahuasca or all politicians should take psychedelics. I think we're in delusion a little bit. Do you think?
I think you've hit on a very important political point, actually. Now, I also do a lot of work with mental health. I have complex PTSD myself and moral injury. So I talk a lot about that publicly, and I'm working on the policy for mental health a great deal. So in a one way, I understand completely the almost evangelism around psychedelics, because they are revolutionary in mental health treatment. They are, genuinely. There's no doubt about that. They are clearly more effective than any treatments that we have already. However, this sort of idea, you know, spreading the sort of meme, this idea that the world can change dramatically if all politicians took ayahuasca or mushrooms or whatever it is, this is actually dangerous to the reform movement. And I'll give you an example. One thing that held back cannabis reform for many years is the evangelism within the movement. People saying the state doesn't want you to know that cannabis can cure cancer.
Conspiracy theorists as well, right? I mean, this is kind of the message that I grew up with growing up in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the trouble is those voices get picked up in the tabloids. Those voices become the branding for a movement. And I have become obsessed with messaging, effective messaging, how to communicate what we need to communicate with the public. And these outliers that say things which are without evidence, but become the banners of a movement, are really dangerous.
Yeah.
And I can see great risks in not sticking to not just the evidence, but also the evidence and how to promote the evidence. So, but this is a bugbear of mine. We're not going to calm people down by saying this in this conversation, but I think it's worth people out there just considering that when we talk about how we want to have genuine influence.
Yeah. So we need to abandon the herd mind and jump on a wagon of anything.
Jump on the what, sorry?
On the wagon of like anything that promotes something as the cure or the answer or the, you know, that's where the dangers come from, I believe.
I think so, because people turn off. People don't believe it. People, it reinforces their idea of that's just a silly hippie movement that belongs to the woke left, or however they want to brand it, or to the libertarian crazies, and some people would dismiss it in the States, you know. We need to be grounded in the evidence, but we need to be grounded in how we communicate it. That's all I'm trying to say. Much as I love the community, much as I love the culture, you know, I love the underground culture, how colourful it is. You know, I love the music that goes with psychedelic culture. But we need to be self-aware, and we need, there are many people, and I am being critical of some aspects of the movement. There are some people who immerse themselves so much in the culture, psychedelic culture, that they become blinkered as to how the real world really communicates. Sometimes.
Yeah, very powerful message here again. These are amazing points. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. What are you sharing in your book, and how our listeners can get their hands on it?
Well, my first book, Good Cop, Bad War, is a memoir. I suppose it follows my journey through. It's written like a true crime book because it was aimed at the true crime people who like true crime, because they're not a group of people who would necessarily be open to drug law reform issues. So it was done that way purposefully, but it tells the stories, my infiltrating organised crime, lots of times I almost got killed and those kind of stories, but also what made me realise that there are a lot of people out there hurting. There are a lot of people out there who are suffering the effects of childhood trauma and they need help. And that's my journey, I suppose, and my motivation for trying to change the world now. My second book is a history of drug policy, but it's told through first-person stories, people's stories, real people, real narratives. And now the work that I'm doing, I haven't got time for another book now because I'm always too busy
talking and spreading
the message. Yeah, I think my co-writer and I, J.S. Raffaeli, would like to do another book, but neither of us have got the time. One of the things I'm working on, I'm a founding member of a coalition of drug policy reform and environmental justice, which is the meeting point between drug policy and the climate crisis, which I've already alluded to. But that's one of the things I'm working hardest on now. The coalition's going to be at the COP in Brazil later this year, which is going to be the first time that drug policy is actually considered in the climate space. And we are working really hard on trying to win over people within the environmental movement, our comrades in Greenpeace, Global Witness, the World Wildlife people, whoever it is. We're trying to get them to realise that the single biggest barrier potentially to what they do is drug prohibition.
Right.
And there can be no greater work, I think, in the world at the moment. And so the leader of our coalition, Clemmy James, has done an incredible job in pulling people from disciplines all over the world, indigenous activists, with academics, with all sorts of disciplines from all over the world, scientists from literally countries all over the world, as a live think tank, a live collaboration. And so I probably should send you a link to these things afterwards that you can share.
Yes, we will.
But look up the work of Clemmy James and the rest of us.
Sounds amazing. So we will add all of your information, your links and your bio and everything, your book links as well in the show notes, because we want this to be out there and share it with our audience. One last question before we let you go. How are you received by your people, from your being the police officers, and how are you received by them?
Oh, that's a really good question, because when I went public I resigned in 2011. I had a mental health crisis to get through, but I knew I needed to become an activist. When I first went public, I think in 2014, I got hate mail. I was a betrayer. Because I was whistleblowing, I was giving secrets away of covert policing. I was seen as a traitor. It was really hostile, really, really threatening, actually. But then when Good Cop, Bad War came out in 2016, from then onwards, I've only really got support. I've had messages of support, messages from cops who say, yeah, you've articulated my feelings, my own observations. But the thing is, it's not just me. I'm not on my own. I'm not the only police officer to do this. I'm part of an international organisation. LEAP, the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, is growing internationally, and we are having influence. So it's interesting, actually, that of all the countries in the world, in the UK, it's been the place where where the police have led drug policy reform, in spite of politics, not because of it. So we've had the beginnings of diversion schemes where police leaders have actually decided to set up themselves diversion schemes to drug services rather than arrest people who are using drugs. Wow. And this has happened not because of central politics. This is the police that's led it. Now that's decriminalization.
Yeah.
In a country that doesn't support it in central politics. And that's spreading across the country. And that's because of the movement within police of which I'm a part, that is wanting to change things. So it's, you know, a lot of people don't realize that there are good cops trying to change this and try from within.
Yeah.
It's not universal, of course. There are still aggressive drug war warriors within policing leading a lot of the places, and it is a postcode lottery. You know, you are going to get a diversion scheme in Thames Valley or in Durham or in Somerset, and you'll still get arrested in Sheffield. You know, so it's a lottery, yeah, but it's going in the right direction, and that's being led by police. And you know, that's because of my team, the people I work with, that are spreading the word.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for the work you do, because I speak to younger generation, and they always have a really bad experience just wanting to smoke a joint and then being pulled to the side and having to face a lot of, you know, I guess consequences. I think you're always hoping that it will change. I know it takes more than one person and we need to come together, but I think we also need to change our perception about the position of the police, I think, in this.
Yeah, we do, but we also have to challenge the police, and that's my responsibility in my organisation, because, you know, we have to be honest here. Police should not be in people's lives, interfering in people's lives, what they want to do with their own mind and body. That's a basic principle, and we've got a long way to go to win police over with that in general. But we have to also focus on the end goal. We should champion every reform that we can. We should make sure that we have safe consumption spaces, drug consumption rooms for people who need to use drugs to keep them alive and safe. We need harm reduction. We need heroin prescribing. We need harm reduction in every facet, of every type. But the end goal has to be the legal regulation of all drugs to take the power away from organised crime. And then policing will be a lot easier, because then policing will be about what it always should have been about, which is the preservation of life and not the interference with people's personal choices.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much. So that's a really good point to end it. And I'm hoping that we can connect again on another episode in a different setting and continue conversations. Thank you, Neil. Really appreciate your work. And what would you leave our listeners with today? The message, where can they support you?
Well, it's a very difficult time for drug policy, because for one reason or another, a lot of the money has come out of the drug policy reform movement. You know, a lot of the philanthropy is disappearing. The US aid cuts. People don't realize the US aid supports harm reduction right across the world, in Southeast Asia. Very important people where it's been saving lives. So it's just occurred to me only yesterday that I should be using my platform to actually ask people to contribute money to the drug law reform movement, because we're in a bit of a crisis at the moment. So if you do want to support in the USA, you can support the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, the work that we do. We also are present in Europe, in the UK. If you want to support the families, like anyone's child at the moment needs a lot of money, because again, George Soros has pulled the money out of their organisation. They're doing a mass lobby of Parliament in the UK on the 24th of June. Please come to that if this film goes out before that, or please, if you can't be there, if you can't be active yourself, please put your hands in your pocket and give what you can to support the people who can be active. If you want to know more about all of the things that I'm involved in, all of the links are going to be obvious below wherever this is shown.
We'll do that. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Please do comment, share your thoughts, and feel free to get in touch with Neil. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.